Hi, my name is Olivier Georgeon. I am a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Lyon. And I am going to talk about how to implement a system that has its own motivation. So as you know, the traditional way to program artificial agents or artificial robots is to implement a mechanism to perform a predefined task or to enact a specific behavior. And the traditional way to do artificial intelligence is to solve a specific problem that was previously modeled by a human. But you may ask, how would it be possible to implement an artificial system that has its own motivation, that asks its own questions and solve its own problems? So you may think it's a very challenging question because in fact, it addresses even the core problem of consciousness. How can we make sense of things with regard to our own motivation? So to address this question, we try to simplify this problem as much as we can, and we take inspiration from very simple natural organisms, such as insects or archaic vertebrates, and we try to model those essential mechanisms that makes them self-motivated, as we are going to see. So we have this experiment with this artificial agent that is represented by this little ladybug here in this grid with empty squares that are white and walls that are green. And what's important here is that this agent has no direct way of perceiving its environment. It doesn't see walls. It doesn't even know that it is in a two-dimensional grid. What the agent has, instead, is a set of predefined possibilities of interaction. So it can try to move forward, and that may succeed if there is an empty square ahead, or fail if there is a wall, in which case the wall would flash red. And it can try to touch in front or to the left or to the right, in which case the square would flash yellow, and the agent will receive a single bit feedback on this interaction. Or the agent can turn to the left and to the right, and if it turns toward a wall, the wall would flash pink, and which indicates the feedback that is received by the agent. So each of these possibilities of interactions are associated with a predefined value for the agent. So moving forward has a high positive value, and bumping has a negative value. And the whole point is how the agent will learn to categorize its situation and to perceive its environment in order to maximize its inborn value system. Okay, so let's run this experiment. So what we see here is that at the beginning the agent just acts randomly. It picks random interaction because it doesn't even know what they mean. And gradually the behavior gets more and more organized. Here we see that it starts to use touching in order to detect the presence of wall and to adapt its turning and move forward depending on the touching. Okay, that's it. So what's interesting in this result is that as opposed to most traditional approach to artificial agent, we didn't even predefine the perception of the agent. The agent learns to use certain interactions to pick information about the environment and to inform its future behavior with regard to its predefined motivation. And because of that, we can argue that the agent can make sense of its perception with regards to its own motivation. So this figure provides a simplified description of the algorithm. As we said, we do not separate perception and cognition at the first place. Many theories in cognitive science suggest that we should not do that. Instead, we should keep perception and action embedded into what is sometimes called sensory motor patterns on what we call primitive interactions. So our primitive interactions are represented here along the interaction timeline as little symbols, white and yellow. And what the algorithm does is learning in long-term memory sequences of such interactions and organizing these sequences in a hierarchy, with higher level sequences being sequences of lower level smaller sequences. And then the current situation activates previously learned sequences in what we call the agent's situation awareness, meaning that the agent represents its current situation in terms of patterns of interaction. And this representation of the situation, in turn, activates future behavior that match the agent's predefined motivation. So that's roughly how our agent managed to, at the same time, learn and discover regularities of interaction with its environment and exploit these regularities to fulfill its predefined drives. Now, the main difficulty when concretely implement this algorithm is that it's very counterintuitive. The intuitive way would be to use a variable that would represent, for example, the reward value for reaching a goal. But when we think like that, we do not manage to implement the behavior that we have seen. Instead, we have to think the other way around and think of a mechanism of organization of behavior in such a way that when we observe the behavior, it looks like the agent receives a reward when it reaches a certain goal, even though we didn't program this reward. To illustrate what I just said, here is a second experiment. This agent has a simple visual system made of 2 pixels. Each pixel detects the corresponding visual quadrant in the board and detects only the blue color. So the visual system will send a signal to the agent when the blue color appears or enlarged or disappears from the visual field. And a positive value is associated with the blue color appearing or enlarging in the visual field, which causes the agent to tend to move towards the blue color. Okay, so let's look at this experiment. So again, at the beginning, the agent's behavior is quite random, but very quickly it gets organized here in what we have called the diagonal strategy, consisting of moving toward the blue squares in a stepped progression. So what's interesting here is that these strategies emerge from the self-motivation of the agent. And as we are going to see in another experiment, another strategy will emerge with the same algorithm. So here is another run where the agent learns another strategy. So like in the first one, there is an initial phase where the agent acts quite randomly, and then after a while it discovers a strategy and sticks to it. So here it is. This strategy comes from the fact that the agent cannot predict when the blue square will disappear from its visual field as it moves forward. So it will go one step too far and has to make a U-turn and go back to align itself with the blue square. This experiment illustrates an interesting principle of self-motivation. So the animal has predefined drives to do certain things, such as eat, and these drives are coded in its genes. The animal didn't choose these motivations, and they will never change. However, the same animal with the same genes, in our case the same program, may learn different ways of satisfying these drives. This experiment shows a slightly more complex agent. It is represented as a shark here. We choose the shark because it is a very archaic animal. It appeared more than 400 million years ago. And this agent is motivated to explore silent objects in its environment. So it goes to interact with algae, whales, fish, and eventually learns that fish are more interesting than the other objects in the environment, and it gets this tendency to move toward fish. The view on the right shows its internal viewpoint on its environment. So the tape at the bottom shows its visual field. The tape above shows what it can touch. The tape above shows its decisional mechanism. The tape above shows its satisfaction value when it interacts with the environment. And above that, the last tape shows the sequences that it learns through interaction. Finally, in this last experiment, we have two agents. The fish are just moving on a straight line on bouncing on the walls. As before, these agents have a motivation to explore their environment and to eat fish, and in addition, they like cuddling with each other. So here we see them cuddling together, and they are not smart enough to know that there are fish behind the walls, but as soon as they see these fish, they will chase them. On the right, we can see one of the agent's spatial memory that represents what the agent knows about its local surrounding environment. And these little triangles represent different possibilities of interaction that the agent associates with objects. So green and red triangles represent bumping into a wall, which the agent doesn't like, and pink triangles represent different ways of cuddling with the other agent, and yellow triangles represent different ways of eating a fish. So that's it for the moment, but it's an ongoing research project. We are still exploring how to implement agents that would be able to learn that objects are persistent or not in the world, and how to interact more efficiently with such objects. And it's a long research process. We are still far from being able to implement these algorithms in robots, for example, that would be able to act as naturally as animals would do in the world. But we're still working on it. So if you are interested by this project, you can follow our blog at e-ernest, that's our agent's name, .blogspot.com, and you will learn more about our research team and scientific publications and see more demos. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this talk.